Hey everybody, and welcome back to another F1 Roundup brought to you by SeedStream. In this video, we're going to be talking about everything Canadian Grand Prix related, of course. We're going to talk about where on earth did Ferrari go? Where were they this weekend? What happened to McLaren? Could they have won that Grand Prix? And how did Max Verstappen end up winning again in a car that definitely was not dominant this weekend? Plus lots of other things along the way. Basically, whatever I can dream up over the next 10 or 15 minutes. This video is brought to you by SeedStream, as all of my videos are at the moment. SeedStream is, at the moment, a Formula One app, but actually will roll out into other sports and other areas over time. It is my favourite place to get all my Formula One information and news, all my content all together in one place, and I would love it to be your favourite place to do that too. You can download it for free via the link in the description of this video, or by searching SeedStream in any of the places where you get your apps. Give it a go. I'd love to know what you think. Let's talk about the Canadian Grand Prix then, because let's start with Ferrari. Ferrari won last time out, having been utterly dominant with Charles Leclerc, and yet this time they were almost anonymous. We barely saw them, other than the fact that one of them, in Carlos Sainz, played a fairly pivotal role in the race by causing a safety car and wiping out Alex Albon. But actually, in terms of their performance, they were nowhere. This is a circuit around Montreal, which is a brilliant track for lots of different reasons. It's an amazing event, actually, by the way. One of the best ones to go to if you ever get the chance to travel to a race and you want to pick one. It is a good one. The reason is that the track's good, always throws up something a little bit different, but also the event is so well embraced by the city of Montreal. It almost becomes a sort of carnival atmosphere. They shut down the roads in the city. There's parties and street parties and all sorts of stuff going on every day over the course of the Grand Prix weekend, which makes it a real, festival type atmosphere. So despite the weather this weekend, I hope that everyone that was there had a wonderful time. And as I said, the race was good. It's a specific type of track because it's high speed, it's got that incredibly long straight, and that means you've got to have low downforce setups on the car. You can't afford to get out dragged down that straight. You'll absolutely definitely lose places, as people did over the course of the weekend by doing just that. So low downforce, but also quite a lot of slow speed corners. There's not a massively wide variation of corner types at this track, like there are at many other tracks. You often get a mix of high speed and low speed or medium speed corners. Here there's a lot of fairly low speed corners. And that will obviously suit some teams and drivers and definitely not suit others. McLaren have typically struggled with slow speed corners when they have to balance that with the more traditional needs of a more contemporary circuit which has a mixture of corner types. In Monaco, for example, McLaren, which is all slow speed stuff, McLaren were able to really set the car up just for the slow speed without having to compromise those characteristics for the needs of the higher speed corners that you might find at other tracks. And it was something similar here. So the reason I'm saying this around Ferrari is that Ferrari just did not manage to make it work. In the way that McLaren did, Ferrari definitely didn't. And when you throw in that extra variable of the mixed weather conditions over the course of this weekend, which makes the requirements from your car and driver even more specific than normal, they just couldn't get the tyres working. They couldn't get heat into the tyres. They couldn't generate the amount of load that they need through those tyres in those conditions with the setup they had to put on the car to generate the heat to keep those tyres in the right temperature window. And if you're just 10, 15 degrees outside of that window, that very specific band of temperature in which the tyres activate, where the rubber activates and generates the grip, if you haven't got that specific tyre temperature window activated, your car doesn't work. I mean, it literally has zero grip, or comparatively zero grip. So that's seemingly what happened to Ferrari, and because of that they really struggled in qualifying, and to put themselves down the back of the grid, you're just never going to make too much progress in the race. And then of course Charles Leclerc had problems with his engine, which they seemingly managed to reset with a sort of control-alt-delete at the pit stop. They took some slightly strange gambles in terms of tyre strategy by that point, but effectively the race was really lost when it came to from qualifying on there's a dog. Lots of you keep saying, can we see more of your dogs in these videos? Well, there's one. And there's the other. They are Australian Shepherds. for those who'd like to know. So yeah, Ferrari had a real anonymous weekend where things just didn't go well, and actually they were so anonymous that the only really point of interest from a Ferrari point of view in terms of the overall race was when Carlos Sainz had that spin which wiped out Alex Albon and brought out a safety car, which did turn the race a little bit. So they had very little impact other than a negative one over the course of this Grand Prix, which is a shame for them, but I'm sure they will bounce back. As I say, it's a very specific set of circumstances around this particular circuit. When it came to McLaren, I think they could have and should have won this Grand Prix. I know lots of the talk afterwards that was that Lando Norris was really unlucky with the safety car deployment and the timing of it, which really, which picked him up when the others were able to pit. I actually don't buy that. And I think if McLaren are really honest with themselves, which they will be in their debrief afterwards when they start looking into this, and I hate to be too critical of any team because I know how difficult it is to make split-second decisions from the heat of battle. But when that safety car was deployed, there was time for Lando Norris to get into the pits. The team have software on their computers that flash up when a safety car is deployed. They also flash up what the prediction says they should do, so what their options are and what the chances of each of those outcomes from the various choices they have ahead of them, will likely be. So there's a lot of tools that they have at their disposal to help them make those decisions, and they're instant. That's what they're there for. They're running simulations every few seconds all the way through the race, hundreds of simulations, if not more. So these things are always in the back of their mind. They know at any point in a Grand Prix, if the safety car is deployed now, what would we do? What should we do? That's a conversation that's constant all the way through a race. So when that safety car was deployed, there was still time. There was definitely still time for either the team to call Lando in, which is obviously, I think, what should have happened. It was a no-brainer that that's what needed to be done at that point. But also, there's an argument here that Lando Norris could have made the decision himself. And I suspect if this was a Lewis Hamilton, if it was a Fernando Alonso, a much more experienced driver, that may well be what would have happened. I've been in the pit lanes before where the driver has made a call because he knows it's the right thing to do, and there isn't time to wait for the team to have a conversation about what to do. There are times when the driver just makes the call, gets on the radio and says, I'm coming in. And yes, it's a scramble. The team have to get those tyres ready and prepared. But they had a long way down that pit lane to go to get to his garage. I think it was definitely possible, and I think it would have been the right way to go. The right decision should have been to pit the very second that safety car was deployed. That way he'd have been on the same strategy, if you like, as the others that were around him, but he'd have kept track position, importantly, and he'd have been on the right tyre at the right time, same as everybody else, with track position, with a clear track in front of him. As it was, of course, doing that slow lap behind the safety car while the others made their pit stop and were able to go much quicker while they caught the safety car, that's what really cost Lando. I also suspect, if McLaren are really honest, again, these things will all come out in their own debriefs, in their own wash. They will analyse everything around what happened, which radio communications were made, what decisions were made. They will know the ins and outs of all of this by today as to what they could have done or should have done, what might they do differently if they were faced with a similar situation in the future. When he stayed out for that extra 2 laps after the others around him, Max Verstappen, George Russell and co, pitted. When they went onto their slick tyres, Lando stayed out for another 2 laps. And I get the reasoning behind it, because this is being really picky, by the way, but he was very quick at that point. It was a crossover point on the circuit. It wasn't really clear cut as to when the changeover was. But I suspect when they analyse it, it could be that Lando stayed out for 1 lap too many on his intermediate tyres, as opposed to switching onto the slick tyres like the others did. That extra 2 laps really allowed Max Verstappen to get his tyres up to temperature by the time Lando came out, and that would have made a huge difference in terms of getting the drive out of those corners. I know Lando came out onto a very wet part of the track at the pit lane exit, of course, but actually Max Verstappen had tyres up to temperature, which Lando didn't. Tyres take at least a lap or so, particularly in those conditions, to get up to working temps. That's where you generate the grip. And Lando being out for 2 laps just allowed Max to really build that temperature, so that when they got into the fight, it was actually not really a fight at all, and Max was able to pull a considerable lead using that tyre temperature and get away. So look, I thought it was a great weekend from McLaren. The real positives, as they kept saying, were they have got a car that's capable of fighting at almost every circuit. They are making real progress with that car, and there is more progress to come. And it's great for Formula One that we've got this fight at the front, which Mercedes for this weekend at least joined. Ferrari disappeared, but they will be back. We've got an exciting Formula One season ahead of us, where the championship, particularly the Constructors' Championship, is not guaranteed. And there is lots still to play for. So do not take your eyes off Formula One right now. But I'm really pleased for everyone at McLaren. I think that, as I said, those little questions, and even Oscar Piastri said there were some things they could do differently around communication and radio comms, and I kind of get what he was talking about with some of the frustration on his radio with the messages coming his way. They're all little tiny things. They're tiny things that can and will be ironed out and fixed without too much trouble. That's a great position to be in, isn't it, as a team, when you know you've got a car that's got pace and it's just those little tweaks that you need to fix to really get yourself to the very top echelons of this sport. They are close, and that I think is great. For all the things I said about the specifics of this circuit really not suiting Ferrari, it definitely suited Mercedes this weekend. They had a car, yes, with some upgrades, but they had a car that really was working in these conditions. And I think particularly in the hands of George Russell, they had a real chance at fighting, at times for victory. Genuinely, on pace alone, they had chances for victory, but George made too many mistakes. It's been a little feature of him, and he's a young driver still, obviously with a reasonable experience now, but he needs to iron out those little tiny mistakes. But what I like about George is he's quite happy to admit them, as Lewis was at the end of that Grand Prix too. He didn't get it perfectly right either, but he's also a driver, George Russell, as is Lewis, by the way, who is always looking for the tiniest little things that might be able to improve his or the team's game. And I think we keep seeing that. We saw that in terms of his aggression on track. I actually think he deserved a penalty, if I'm honest, with that collision with Oscar Piastri. I think the stewards chose not to give him one, almost certainly because there was no big accident as a result of it. But actually, we shouldn't be giving penalties on the outcome of an infringement. If Oscar Piastri had spun out of that corner, there's 100% a penalty coming George Russell's way. So if I was really going to push it, I'd say he should have deserved one anyway. Anyway, got away with it, and I think we got to see some great racing as a result. But yeah, Mercedes very close in the mix again. Let's hope they can continue that form. Just got to niggle out or iron out those niggly little mistakes, but positive from the Silver Arrows. So somehow Red Bull managed to win another Grand Prix, and they didn't do it through just having an absolutely dominant car like we've seen on many occasions, particularly at the start of this season. They did it through not making mistakes, in the hands of Max Verstappen at least, and from getting their calls right, being calm under pressure, and taking the opportunities when they came their way. Yes, they capitalised on mistakes by others, but that's the point, isn't it? Red Bull, and particularly Max, don't tend to make very many mistakes. Where George Russell was making his, where McLaren potentially, if you go with my argument here, made a couple of mistakes themselves, which might have cost them the win, it allowed Max Verstappen and Red Bull to be there to capitalise, and that's what they do so well. But as I keep saying, it is great that we've definitely got a proper fight on at the front here. On Sergio Perez's side, it was another absolute disaster, another one to forget, off the back of a contract extension, which I still don't get. I think he's got that by default to some extent, in terms of keeping Max and that side of the team happy. The whole sort of situation around Christian Horner that's ongoing with the controversies, I think the more stability they're able to have, perhaps that might alleviate some of those other tensions. But look, in terms of Sergio's results, it's been shockingly bad, and they are going to suffer in this Constructors' Championship if he cannot get himself up to speed very quickly. The rest are coming, and they're coming fast. They also landed themselves a 3-place grid penalty and a €25,000 fine for instructing Sergio Perez to drag that battered car after he'd spun it into the barriers all the way back round to the pits, which I understand they didn't want to cause a safety car as a result of stopping that car on track. But perhaps again, when they review it and look at what they could have done differently, they might have suggested they could have parked it right next to a marshal's post, somewhere that was easy to recover, and avoided the need for a safety car anyway. But anyway, another 3-place grid penalty for Checo at the next round, which won't do him any good whatsoever, or the team. They need to get better on that side of the garage for sure. Further back, there were good results for Daniel Ricciardo, which was much needed, particularly off the back of Jacques Villeneuve's comments earlier in the weekend, which I understand where he was coming from, but I thought they were a bit harsh. He does like to drop a grenade into a situation, Jacques Villeneuve. I'd like to know what you think. Was he right, or was he just being a little bit over the top? Anyway, pleased to see a good result from Daniel Ricciardo. And if we go back even further, Esteban Ocon, although the team at Alpine had a good result in terms of a double points finish, there is a massive situation brewing in terms of driver harmony or team harmony at that organisation. Esteban Ocon, I'm sure you'd have seen it by now, had disagreements and arguments over the radio when his team asked him to let Pierre Gasly by. Come on, you, here you come. He at first refused to do that, then argued it to the point where by the time he eventually let him by, it was only a lap and a half to go, and it was actually too late for Pierre Gasly to have any sort of chance of having a run at Daniel Ricciardo, and it didn't work, and then they didn't even have time to swap them back. And the result of that was that Esteban was very upset with the team, made that his feelings very, very public, which never goes down well with the team. And given that he's already lost his drive, in inverted commas, through mutual consent, but that's rarely ever the case, I suspect that's a relationship which is going downhill rapidly. There's a lot of talk about him already having a seat lined up for next year, which you could only assume is Haas, unless Audi are not going to get hold of Carlos Sainz because he goes to Williams. And then what else have they got? They are rapidly running out of options for Audi. This is a works team that's got Nico Hülkenberg. They needed a big name driver. If they can't get Sainz, where else do they go? Surely not Esteban Ocon. So lots of driver moves and changes still on the horizon, but a really interesting weekend. I hope you enjoyed it. It was great to have a bit of weather thrown into the mix. A great circuit in Montreal as well. I hope you loved it, and I will see you again very soon. Don't forget to go and download SeedStream. I think you'll love it.